Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with Eugene Marshall. Are you the brains behind S5E?
Well, I'm the author. It's published in part by my friend Aaron A. DeVito of Sigil Entertainment. So he is the, let's say, art master that's putting together a lot of this beautiful art. But I did write the game itself.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'm really glad we were able to talk about this because so S5E, for those that don't know, is a superhero role-playing game for the fifth edition system that Wizard of the Coast has created for D&D. So I'm really glad. I was actually talking to some friends recently about some of the older superhero games from back in the day, like the Marvel game, Champions, DC, Heroes Unlimited from back then. And I was wondering when we'll see more of that in the 5e system. And voila, this is it. So tell us about this. What am I imagining this correctly? This is a game where you can play superheroes in a modern setting.
That's correct. So it is a superhero game designed to be flexible to play a variety of different styles of superhero narrative, but it does use that familiar rule set under the open gaming license from Wizards of the Coast's Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So it's if you know that system, this is easy to just pick up and play immediately.
So let's talk about powers. Because usually when I think of a superhero system, I always wonder about the balance of powers and abilities you can get, where someone like Robin versus someone like Galactus, things like that.
Right.
How does your game balance that?
Well, I guess there's two ways of answering this question. The first is it doesn't, because those two people shouldn't be equal, right? Robin and Galactus aren't on the same level, but already built into D&D, you have this with the levels, right? So, somebody like Superman, you can't make a first level Superman character. You could make a first level character that could grow into Superman someday, but isn't Superman, right? So Superman's already going to start in D&D terms as a pretty high level character. But that's okay, because there's pretty clear instruction in the book for there's kind of two styles of story you can tell. And you see these in comics too, right? First, you get like the Spider-Man story where he starts as a teenager, just learning his powers, and he's just kind of patrolling a neighborhood. And then other arcs, other runs, depending on author and things, you get him in college, or he's more powerful. He's kind of fighting citywide threats, but then later you get him in the Avengers, right? And he's fighting global or galactic level threats. And his powers seem to kind of scale up with him, right? And so you can play that way, where you kind of slowly work your way up from level 1 to 20. But if you also want to just start with the Fantastic Four, or you want to make, Wonder Woman, that's fine. You just start with a level 15 character, and then there's rules for making, because it takes kind of a while to make a level 15 D&D character. So there's some guidance on how to make that, like shortcuts, quick pick sort of moves to make that process pretty easy. And then you just start with a character at that level. And there's kind of guidance for how you can build narratives around characters that are high powered, because that's actually kind of hard to do in fantasy versions of D&D sometimes. So that's how we balance the relative powers of heroes. Then, of course, there's the fact that you have to balance superpowers versus mundane threats, right? So somebody's throwing fire around. I mean, isn't this going to be OP, so to speak? Well, no more than it is in a superhero story. I mean, yeah, like if Human Torch says flame on and starts throwing fire around, you're like mugger he's outgunned, right? But he doesn't fight muggers usually. He'll fight, Dr. Doom or something. And so you just have to pit the threats appropriately, right? And so the S5E is going to use the same sort of challenge system and encounter balancing calculus, which, though imperfect as it is still a decent guide from Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. So Dungeons and Dragons still uses like classes, race, things like that. How do you incorporate something similar to that for this?
So I don't know if you recall, but when we last talked about my Ancestry and Culture book for D&D, fantasy D&D, that replaced the concept of race with these two choices of ancestry, which is like who your parents are, and culture, which is where you grew up. So we actually use that system in S5E as well. You choose your ancestry, so you can be human or mutant or alien or robotic or Atlantean, things like that. And then you choose where you grew up. So do you want to be Superman, an alien who grew up on Earth? Or how about Star-Lord, a human who grew up raised by aliens? Things like this. So you make that choice. And then you choose class. And we have 10 classes currently. We're going to probably have stretch goals at least one or two more. But and each class gives you your kind of distinctive flavor of superhero power options. And we'd like to think that we cover all the major bases from your favorite comics and movies with those 10 classes.
Oh, okay. Then what do you have for tools for game masters or dungeon masters?
Right. So well, there's a lot of guidance because I think it's important to recognize that a superhero game is a little different than a fantasy game, right? So in D&D, you don't have to play this way, but built into the kind of nuts and bolts of the system is a concept of scarcity, right? You have only so many spell slots. You have only so many hit points. You have only so many arrows. You can only action surge once or whatever, right? So it's about resource management. That really doesn't feel as much like a superhero game to us. So we kind of changed the rules around that. So for example, when a higher level hero uses superpowers, they're not spending spell slots. They're using these powers at will. Now, some people have said, but isn't that really imbalanced? Let me tell you a secret shared, well, not with me, but with the world by Jeremy Crawford, lead rules designer for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. He said they balanced those power abilities, class abilities, like high level spells or class features. Even if those class features or spells are only once a day, they balance them as if every combat those are going to get used. And so it's already baked into the mechanics that these people are using their most powerful stuff all the time. And if you've ever played D&D with one of those parties that all wants to have one combat and then rest again, and they just keep wanting to do that, that's kind of, it still kind of works. The mechanics all work still just fine that way. It's just easier. Well, then you're playing like a superhero because every battle imagine if Human Torch, I used to use my Fantastic Four example again, goes flame on, and he flames up and he starts throwing fire, and he throws he shoots fire twice, and then his flames kind of sputter out. He's like, sorry guys, I'm out of power slots. I'm going home, right? That's not heroic. That's not superheroes. So, we had to kind of get rid of some of those concepts to make it feel like a superhero genre, but it actually doesn't change much under the hood.
Okay.
So it'll be pretty easy to adjust. But we talk about it with game masters, but I think they'll be able to make the transition easily. I mean, there's a bunch of other mechanics we also provide as optional because it depends what kind of game you want. Some people love the kind of high flying 4-color adventures where people are soaring through the skies and fighting big battles and not worrying too much about the details, let's say, or collateral damage, right? Well, maybe you want a game where you care about that. Maybe that's something that you want to build in. So we have optional rules for tracking collateral damage and what the political or legal consequences are of destroying city blocks, right? We've got optional rules on innocent bystanders, right? And then other superhero fun things, like there's optional rules on secret identities, how to manage those, optional rules on your building and designing your hidden lair, right? You got to have your bat cave. So those are all in there for game masters if they want to implement them. And, but they're all kind of plug and play. You use them if you want.
Oh, that's great. One of my favorite comics from Marvel way back, which I wish they would go back to, it was a series called Damage Control. And the whole point, I mean, it was a comedic series, but the whole point was they were trying to fix up all the damage that the superheroes and supervillains would get into around the city.
Right.
So it sounds like this system is very flexible. It doesn't have to be like generic, old school. I shouldn't call it generic. Old school Jack Kirby, Stan Lee style of entry. It could be all sorts of. Could be a little bit of Vertigo or a little bit of alternative comics. Does that sound right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you want to play, for example, if I think the kind of core of the gameplay is borrowed in part from the D&D feel, which I think I would describe as MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're talking PG-13, ultimately feel good, heroic adventure, but it's very easy to just tweak it just a little bit. And I'm sure you've played D&D games like this if you play a lot of D&D. So it's a little darker, a little grittier, a little more, Zack Snyder, or to turn it all the way up to 11 and make it really dark and it's like the boys or something, if you want, or Invincible, if you want some kind of extreme examples from recent media, or Garth Ennis's The Punisher run in comics, right? This is definitely edgy and dark stuff. You can play that in D&D too, but we have some guidance on how to run games with different like tone and content. And then of course there's also guidance because this can be a minefield. There can be pitfalls. So we give some guidance about how to handle sensitive content, both violence and like darkness, dark tone, but also things like how do you handle race and gender and ability, and because there's a bad history in comics, for example, of using disability as like kind of a stand-in for the villain. For example, the villain is a disabled person and they're a villain because they're bitter about their disability, that sort of thing. You see it in that movie Unbreakable with right, that's kind of was like the road. And so I think I've been told like that disability advocates kind of don't care for that trope. And we're having somebody, actually Sarah Thompson, who is known for her work on the combat wheelchair in D&D. If you ever heard about that, there's a bit of a controversy around that. She's doing great work on the Witcher RPG and some other things, but she's going to write a little section for S5E on disability and superheroes, and just so we've got that kind of guidance in there too.
Oh, that's great, because I know with some of the older superhero RPGs, there's back then they wrote some rules about having mental disability as a, I mean, they didn't call it that, they called it something much more archaic, but as a thing for supervillains and powers and things like that. I was going to ask you if how you handle that in your system, but you sort of answered it.
Well, I do want to make one other note, which is if you look at D&D vanilla out of the box, they have rules for what they call, what do they call it? I think they might call it madness or insanity or something, but it's like, it's like you get cursed by some, you look at whatever, I don't remember what kinds of aboleth or some sorts of things can manipulate your mind and cause this long-term or short-term madness. So that's kind of problematic because it kind of gamifies mental illness. So we changed it and have like a blurb on there about like, look, this isn't like something that is a game. This is, first of all, this isn't what we describe in this game is nothing to do with mental illness, right? So these, we talk a little bit about how to handle that properly. And so we call, you can suffer from corrupted cognition, where there's a superhero, like a superpowered effect is causing you to make mistakes in reasoning, right? So like, maybe it's as simple as you keep forgetting to carry the one when you're doing math, or maybe it's like, somebody's projecting hallucinations into your brain or something, right? So it feels much more like I think like a superheroic effect, and it's separated from real world mental illness enough. We hope that it is less problematic.
And when it comes to the category of powers, does it ranged also to like psionics or to magic? Does it incorporate all those rules as well?
It does. So I'll tell you a secret. Really, the under the hood, what we're looking at of these. I said there's 10 classes. 7 of the 10 classes are built kind of like a D&D caster, spellcaster, right? So they have a unique power list, and then they get a certain number of them per level. And as you say, as I said, as you get higher in level, you can kind of do these powers at will, as many times as you want. But by choosing, so first you choose like a subclass, which really defines what kind of hero your powers are. And then by choosing your specific powers from your list, that really uniquely picks out the heroes, because we're talking 400 or 500 powers to choose from. But that might sound overwhelming, but it's no different than choosing spells in D&D. Because if you look at the whole list of all possible spells, there's hundreds. But just for one particular class at one particular level, you only have like a dozen to choose from. So it's a very similar feel. And one of the classes is mentalist, and the subclasses are telekinetic or telepath, right? So, if you want to somebody that can use mental powers to either maneuver matter or people, manipulate people's minds or reads their thoughts, that's the class for you. And then we have another class called occultist, and the occultist comes in 3 flavors. Let's see, what is it? It's arcane, eldritch, and primal. And so these are 3 different kinds of basically magic users. So like Doctor Strange is clearly an arcane person, whereas you might have like, I don't know, maybe Scarlet Witch might be Eldritch, and then Primal is somebody who's like tapping fundamental forces of life and death, let's say, right? Things like that. So those are all have a magical sort of flavor. John Constantine, you're going to get in that kind of realm too. So yeah, and since I'm mentioning it, I'll just quickly rattle off the other classes. We have Elementalist. So there's about 10 different kind of elements or forms of matter or energy that you can expert focus in. We've got the Kinetic. So that's somebody who channels their powers through their body, either strength, speed, agility, or endurance. We've got the martial artist, who isn't super powered in the traditional sense. They're more like they have incredible martial arts abilities, which can compare with a superhero. So you've got your Shang-Chi's and Iron Fists and whatnot. The mentalist I mentioned. The metamorph is somebody who their power is about transforming their body. So they either change their appearance, or they can stretch and change their body, or they can change size. Or they can turn their body into different elements or substances, like so you get your shapeshifters and Sandman and Metamorpho and stuff like this. The occultist. Then there's a special agent. So if you want to play an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. or maybe a Black Widow character, right? That would be the special agent. So they don't have superpowers, but they're incredibly skilled in other ways. Then there's the tech hero. They can either be somebody that wears like a power armor suit like Iron Man, or they can be somebody who has special gadgets or weaponry, say like, depending on how you wanted to play it, Green Lantern because of the ring, or Blue Beetle because of the alien beetle artifact, then we got the Vitalist, which is somebody that either connects with or manipulates or channels or transforms into plants or animals, right? So, and then the 10th one we announced is the Mastermind, who doesn't have superpowers, but if they're villainous, they have minions that they throw at you. So just like endless mooks, right? And they're like, very, tactically brilliant. Or if you want to turn it into a slightly less problematic, like a heroic version, they have drones or some other non-sentient form of throwaway troop. You know what I mean? Because this, like, good guys aren't just going to be like, go cannon fodder, like that's not really appropriate. But if you've just got, you can issue, hundreds or thousands of little drones to swarm your enemies. It's a very different kind of power from any of these other ones. So those are the 10 we've got so far. 2 more to be revealed soon.
Excellent. So tell us about Midnight City.
Yes. So Midnight City. So what I've been describing is just the rule set. And that's like the player's handbook, right? It's all the rules and every power and thing you need to play the game, as well as guidance for playing. But then the second book is Midnight City, which is a setting. And it is written by Alan Barr. And it is, imagine a kind of a sunny citadel on the sea on the West Coast, an LA, San Francisco sort of place that is, a bastion of superheroic headquarters and goodness. And there's a villain comes to town who performs this awful spell, like an occult villain, and he casts the whole city in eternal darkness. And so even at the height of day, it's still this dusk, shadow, and all kinds of mayhem breaks out. And many of the heroes and the government kind of withdraws because I think the villain also kind of unleashes all these shadowy forces in the city. But some heroes stay because not everybody's able to flee. Some people don't have anywhere else to go, right? And so the city becomes kind of like a no man's land, but there's heroes fighting for goodness and justice in that environment. Like protecting neighborhoods and building bastions and safe havens for people. So what's nice about this is you can play that as dark or as light as you like, right? You can be winning the battle against darkness or whatever, or it can be really grim if you want. B, the other thing that's nice about it is you don't have to worry, if you don't want to, about the, let's face it, constant background challenge in a narrative with superheroes, which is, how do the superheroes work vis-a-vis the police or the government or the justice system, right? You know, you don't have to worry quite as much about, well, why aren't the police enforcing this? This is vigilantism. Well, they've withdrawn. This place is kind of anarchy here. So the fact that these superheroes are operating in this space is feels wholly appropriate. And you can, you can dial that up and down if you want to have that there are some police or there's a military presence, you can. But I think it's a very rich canvas that you can do all kinds of fun stories in. And so that's one of the settings that we are releasing comes with the game, right?
Okay, excellent. And congratulations on your success in your Kickstarter.
Thanks.
It's been successfully funded. So tell us about the Kickstarter stuff that's going on right now, like your stretch goals and things like that.
Sure. So we're, as of the recording of this, we're, I don't know, 6 days in, and we've got about 25 grand and 330 backers. So that's nice. And we've hit a bunch of our stretch goals. We also have the augmented operative registry, which is of, a rogues gallery. It's a monster manual, if you will. Threats of all sorts, not just supervillains. There are also superheroes. There's also, shock troops and combat robots and cosmic entities and, all the kinds of things that you might encounter. So that's in there now too. There's character folios and more art. And the stretch goals also include a bunch of great fiction. So we've got, and adventures that are being written. So we've got, J.V. Jones is a fantastic science fiction writer, and she's written a story for us. We've got John Wick, famous of Seventh Sea and a bunch of other things. He's writing an adventure for us. So, I mean, we've got, so many. A bunch of new heroes and villains. We've got an audio book that tells us a fiction, The Covenant of Six, that's being done by Sound Booth Theater. So it's kind of like it's more than an audiobook. It's almost like an audio play, right? They have sound effects and actors, and so that's really cool. And that's the fiction that's written by Kevin Andrew Murphy, who writes with George R.R. Martin in the Wild Cards books, which are superhero novels. Right. So that's George R.R. Martin's superhero series. And Kevin is an award-winning author in that series. And he wrote 6 little short stories that together, well, more than that, because he's got stories about the villains too. So a bunch of little short stories about the characters on the cover of the book. There's like 6 heroes that are called the Covenant. And he wrote a bunch of stories, and they're going to perform that as an audio play, which I think is super cool because it's a really good story. We've got, let's see, Adventure, another audiobook, more supervillains, a bunch of jumpstart adventures, which are or settings. So we're taking other people's worlds that have a superheroic theme and converting them to the S5E rules, and then issuing them as stretch goal content. So one is called Pantheon, which was a superhero game for Savage Worlds. One is called Knights Arcanum, which has a kind of a slightly different look and style, but it's very cool with some amazing art. Titan Effect is another one. Blood and Justice is another one. So these are all additional content that's coming. It's just a stretch goal, so let you play in a bunch of other settings and a bunch of other adventures as well. Then that comes automatically with the project. And we've got a bunch more fun things kind of planned if the funding continues. I'm looking forward to announcing more.
Oh, excellent. Wow, you have a whole multiverse planned.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's funny. Somebody asked, I was doing an interview on print media, and somebody asked, well, what's next from you guys? I'm like, what's next is more S5E stuff, right? We have so much planned, and we want to support this after it comes out, and maybe release adventures and campaigns, and still let people play this for years to come.
Okay. If I may ask, when you're writing this, what inspires you? Like, is there any favorite comic book series or writers that you follow? What inspires you?
That's a good question. So at different points in my life, there's been different things, right? Like I really, growing up, I was a Spider-Man fan in the 80s, and I really then later in the 90s really got into X-Men, and I grew to love everything on the Vertigo line. I was reading, Transmetropolitan and The Invisibles and, all that sort of kind of fun, challenging stuff. And then in the early to mid late 2000s, right? So anyway, I could keep going on, right? I could list all the different, I read everything that Garth Ennis did, and I read everything that, J. Michael Straczynski did in comics, and, so on and so forth. But more recently, it has been, I'll admit, it's been the movies and the TV shows, right? I still read comics. My most recent favorite couple series might be, I don't know, it might be Ms. Marvel. I love Ms. Marvel. It's super good. And I kind of have I love Squirrel Girl too, even though it's kind of ridiculous. I love it. So that's kind of where, I don't know, maybe it's also because I have kids, right? So I'm like reading it with them sort of thing, but I love that stuff. But TV and movies, I mean, my goodness, we're in the golden age, right? The MCU they pulled off a collection of movies that end up going together into a single story greater than anything anybody's ever seen and done. So that's really impressive. And the way in which, I'll tell you what really inspired me. Did you ever see the video that was recorded inside a movie theater during the final battle of Avengers Endgame? So there's that scene when Thanos is shoving the axe into Thor's chest, and you see Mjolnir just sitting on the ground, and then you see that somebody picks it up, and it's Captain America, right? And he, spin and runs and just kicks Thanos's ass. And in the theater, what's so great about it is people are like cheering, hooting, hollering. The sheer like joy of that moment is amazing. It's like the best drug ever. And the only other time I've really felt that energy is at the very climax of like a multi-year D&D game, right? When I remember running a game where we went levels 1 to 20, and one of my players, it ended up that the villain was his estranged father, and they're fighting this big boss, and it's like 2-3 hours into this final, their level 20 battle. The villain had 99 hit points left, and the son was cast the 9th level spell Power Word Kill, and it's 100 hit points or less, and it instantly kills him. They didn't know how many hit points the villain had left. They were just hoping it was under 100, and it was 99.
I love moments like that.
Right? And in the film too, that's what I wanted to capture. That's my jam. So that was really my big inspiration. I want to try and create moments like that for players using this game.
Oh, okay. So one last question before we wrap up. If you were playing this and I was the game master, what character would you roll up?
Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, I love so many of them. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because I just finished binging Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. not too long ago. So I might do a special agent because I like the idea of being a mundane person standing and fighting among superheroes, right? Like Hawkeye is I really love Hawkeye in that regard. And by the way, speaking of, the Hawkeye comics recently, the past 10 years have been amazing. And they really do a great job of like highlighting the fact that he's like a regular guy, just like putting in his 9 to 5 in the Avengers, right? Yeah. And so I really kind of dig that vibe a lot. That's a lot of fun.
I love the fact that they also recognize the hearing issues he's had, which many writers have ignored, and I'm glad they brought it back a little bit. I agree with you. That's a great series as well. We could go forever about
right?
comics, but great. I'm really excited about this. I'm really glad there's a really good superhero system coming up for 5e, because that's the hole in my 5e collection. There's good cyberpunk stuff out there for 5e and some other genres, but not superhero in my opinion yet. So thank you so much for bringing this to my attention.
Oh no, thank you for talking to me about it. I'm just happy to get it out there and see people react positively because it's fun.
And before we wrap up, I just want to let our readers, I'll let our viewers know that if you haven't read Eugene's Ancestry and Culture book, it's amazing. In my opinion, it's one of the best like third-party books out there about D&D. Thank you, Eugene, for sharing this with us. And again, to our viewers out there, I'll put in the description below. Get your shots, take care, and have a great day.